Hi, it's Paula from Paula Quilting. Welcome back to my channel. I use my magic number system to deal with my scraps, but every now and then I also cut a fat quarter to add to my boxes. It may be because I want to mix in a specific color, or perhaps I found a fat quarter that I don't like that much. The fun thing is that the more you mix in the scrappy designs, so all of those baby fabrics you don't like that much, the better they look. So there will be occasions when I'm working on a certain design where I need lots of 6.5 inch squares, for example. So then I will go and take that fat quarter and just cut it into 6.5 inches, as many as I can, and then I try to cut out some other bits and pieces. Similar with 4.5 inch, you know, if I need a lot of 4.5, I will just cut all my fat quarter with 4.5 inches, and then I use up all the remaining bits to either add it to my crumb boxes, or maybe I will have some strings to add to my string box. So I'm trying to use up all of that kind of surface of that fat quarter. But most of the times I just want a kind of random number of each pieces, so kind of just to mix in with my other scraps in my magic number box. So I will show you 3 ways how I cut those fat quarters, and I basically mix and match those 3 types of cuts. Each time I choose different one, just to make sure that I've got kind of random number of pieces each time I cut the fat quarter. I will usually stack my fat quarters. Here I've got just one for that purpose of showing you how I cut them, but usually I've got 2 or 3, sometimes more, depend, you know, what I've got in my boxes, but 2 or 3 I feel like it's the right number for one type of the cut. And then if I've got more fat quarters to cut, I will just use the second layout and then third, so it's kind of mingled nicely and I've got a random number of pieces. Fat quarters usually comes in the size 18 inches by 21 or 22 ish, depend on the fabric you've got it from, but usually they are at least at 18 inches here wide, so you should be able to cut it the same way. Now you don't have to remember all of those things I will be talking about now. You can pay more attention of the kind of how I'm stacking the fabric, because the layouts of those 3 types of the cuttings will be available on my website in the pattern area for free. So it's good to have for the magic numbers especially, it's good to have a ruler which is 6.5 inch wide. They are quite kind of common standard size by 24 inches. So when you're cutting fat quarter, not only for the magic number system, obviously for any other projects, this is the go-to ruler. It's good to have in your arsenal. You may not need to have any other sizes of the long rulers. This will do the work for almost everything. And just on that note, the second ruler kind of must have when you're working in any quilting is that big 12.5 inch square. If you have just those 2, you can do everything with it. And I would normally recommend buy more rulers as you know what you like to do. If there's a specific size you like to use, then that's the ruler to buy. Don't buy in advance, because you may find that you don't use them, so you just kind of wasted money. But also what you can do is obviously borrow some rulers from your quilting friends. They may have some more they use, and you can try it out whether it's something you will kind of use, and if you do, then you can buy it. So don't necessarily buy lots in one go, just test the waters, see what you like, and then buy the ruler. So first of all, I'm kind of trimming off that edge here nice and straight, because they are not coming trimmed properly, or like, you know, very nice and cut edge. So we want to do that. And then I'm just using my 6.5 inch ruler here to do the 6.5 inch slice. So there's not much to do here. I'm just aligning this line and cutting. Make sure you move your hand as you go with the rotary cutter to make sure it doesn't swivel, shuffle, and kind of move the fabric. What I also have got on my ruler, just on that note, are the kind of pads here I bought on Amazon. I will put a link in the description below, to make my ruler not to move that much. If I didn't have it, it would just slide all over, so that helps with the cutting the fabric. That's my 6.5 inch. The second one and the third one slice I want to do will be 4.5 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And another good tip: measure twice and cut once. So 1, 2, 3, 4.5. It has happened to me that I cut it wrong a few times, so I'm just saying from experience. Again, I've moved my hand with the cutting. So like I said, second and third cut is 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And the remaining piece I will cut into 2.5 inches. It might be 1 or 2 or 3, depends, you know, what the fabric size was. I think this was maybe 21 inches, but you will see how many of those you can cut. 1, 2.5. So I am able to do 2, so that's what I will do. 1, 2.5. Now I don't have a lot of left, that's just rubbish, there's nothing else I can do with it, but that's fine. So I've got my strips, so I've got one 6.5 inch strip, I've got two 4.5 inch strips, and two 2.5 inch strips. So here what I will do, I will stack my fabrics. I will add one strip 2.5 to my 6.5 inch chunk, and this strip into my 4.5 inch pile, and I will just turn my fabric around, and I will align the edges of my two strips. And now I will actually use my cutting mat lines to kind of make that side here nice and straight. So that's the first thing. Again, because they're all ragged there, I want to cut it off. I normally don't use my mat grid for anything else than just aligning on the lines to make sure they're straight, and then perhaps to straighten up the edges like so. Take this away. So now I'm gonna cut 6.5 inch. Again, I'm just aligning here. I can see my lines here are aligned as well, and I will do again. And I will use, you can see I cannot do another 6.5 inch, so I will do 2.5 inch. 1, 2.5, and that's it. I won't be able to cut this into 2.5. So what I've got from those cuts is 2 6.5 inch squares, 3 6.5 by 2.5 inch, and 1 square in kind of in one slot of the cutting. These beads here, that will go to the cramp, that goes to the string box. You could potentially cut 1.5 inch from here. There's a mini chip block, I had a video tutorial on, so that could be used for that. This one, if you cut to 1.5, again you could put 2.5 inches and go to the same bucket. I will link it into this description below, that mini chip tutorial. But if you don't want to kind of, you don't have the inclination of making that block, that goes to the cramp and the string bucket. With that second lot, we will do similar things. So I'll just stack all my pieces on top of each other. I'm just using that line at the top to make them nice and straight, and I'm kind of aligning that side as well, not to cut too much, where I need to straighten up this edge. And that's my 2.5 inch strip, and I will do the same thing. So again, I will come on this side, I will just use one of the lines on my mat to straighten that edge. Here you go, and then I'm going with the 4.5 inch. So 1, 2, 3, 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. Measure twice, cut once. And I will repeat it till the end of that strip. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And another one. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. Here obviously I'm getting to the end, I won't be able to cut it into 4.5, so I'll just cut 2.5. 1, 2.5. And again, I've got a little bit of leftovers, same thing, that will go to a different bucket with different type of scraps. So this goes here, those are my 2.5 by 4.5, and I've got nice big stack of 4.5 squares and 4.5 inch strips. So that's from the fat quarter, one of the type of the cuts. As you can see, there is not much leftovers, but you can still use them in your other projects. So let's move this one away, and I will show you second type of the cuts. Here you go, another fat quarter. Make sure you iron them obviously before you start cutting. I also like to use a little bit of starch depending on the fabric. If fabric is a little bit more flimsy, I will starch it before I start cutting. If it's not that flimsy, the water is quite good to mist it when you're ironing to make it nice and very, very flat. So again, I'm starting from making that edge nice and straight. Okay, in this scenario I will be cutting two 6.5 inch strips first. Then I will have a 1 4.5 inch. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And then obviously whatever I can do here, it will be 2.5 inch, just one strip here. And then I've got a larger piece of string here for my string bucket. I will turn them around. Now because I've got two of the 6.5 and just one 4.5, I will use that strip of 2.5 to add to my 4.5 inch strip when I'm cutting them together. The other option you can do is not cut them at this time. You can leave them just in one piece hanging. You don't need to cut them. You can cut them as and when you need them in your buckets. That goes for all of those three scenarios I'm showing you. Because when it's bigger piece, you can cut it to whatever size you need. You may also like to decide to leave them as a pieces because you will use it for binding, for sashing, maybe in another design. So you may like to, keep them. And I did share it in my other tutorial, which I will link in the description below. This is how I store my strips. I'm just using the clip to clip them together, and I've got the S hooks on the rod to hang them. So then I know what I've got, I know what the colors I've got, and I know they are waiting there. And if I'm kind of missing up in my magic numbers, I can cut more. So it's up to you when and how you want to cut them. Again, I will link that tutorial in the description below if you would like to check it out on how I'm storing all my stuff around my sewing room. So I will leave this 2.5 with my 4.5. So from here I will just cut my 6.5 inches first. So as usual, we'll start from straightening up this edge here, make it nice and straight, and then I'm just going in and doing my 6.5 inch cuts. And from here I will do 2.5 inch, 1, 2.5. And here could I do 1.5 possibly, but then again it depends whether you've got a need for it. If not, that goes to my string bucket. So what I've got some 2.5 by 6.5 and then 6.5 inch squares. Always remember that if you cut them into bigger pieces and then you find yourself that you need more of those, you can always slice it up later for whatever you need. So it's always better to cut it bigger, and then you can make it smaller than other way around. Here I will just put those two together. Again, I will just trim it on the side. And then I can start with my squares. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And here I will just cut 2.5. You could also, instead of cutting all of them into 4.5 inch, first cut 2 to 4.5 and then 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. You would have more squares, two smaller squares out of it too. But again, I can always trim something to 2.5 if I need to, either this or that, or even the square. But I cannot make it bigger if I cut it to, into smaller pieces. So here we go. That's another way of cutting your fat quarter, and that's a little bit of there for cramps and strings. And the third fat quarter now. And again, I'm starting from tidying up this edge here. Okay. So first cut will be 6.5 inch. second one will be 4.5 inch. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And the rest of it I will cut into 2.5 inch strips. So not a lot of left here. I just cut 5-inch strip and then I'm just dividing it into half. I'm finding this a little bit easier when I'm cutting those strips. Here we go. So here I will add 1 strip to my 4.5 and I will cut it the same way as I showed you before. I will add 1 strip to my 6.5 inch, and then here I can either leave them as they are or cut them into squares. Most of the times I do leave them as they are, just like I've mentioned. I do not know how I will use them, whether I will need to cut maybe 6.5, 4.5 or 2.5 inch squares, or just use them maybe into a scrappy binding, so I will leave it as is. And with those ones, same as in previous one, I will line them up, trim the edge, make 2 6.5 inch and possibly 2.5 inch there, and then rest will go to my scrappy bucket. Same here, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 2.5, and the rest goes to my scrappy bucket. So that gives you 3 different scenarios and 3 different kind of ways of cutting fat quarter for your magic number boxes. And as I mentioned, I use them kind of on rotation basis to kind of add the different amount of each of the colors to my boxes. I hope you found it useful, and like I said, pop into my shop. In the patterns area you will find the layout with all of those 3 cuts. This is not the ultimate, way of cutting it. You probably can make your own variations from it as well, but I hope that will get you started if you have a need of cutting fat quarter for your magic numbers. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you like this quick tutorial. I hope you share it with your quilting friends, and see you next time. Thank you for watching. I hope you will share this tutorial, subscribe if you haven't done so. Happy sewing, and see you next time.